Have a seat on your porcelain throne. It's time to talk some shit on the Powell movement.
Welcome to the Powell movement. I'm your host, Mike Powell, and if you've been listening lately, you know I skipped Red Bull Rampage but watched it on the internet, and I hope you did too. This was the 20th anniversary of the event, and one thing that I noticed was that if you look at the footage over the years, this has gone from an event with riders picking rowdy lines that have features that you would never see in a slopestyle event. But every year that changes a bit, and this year's event was the most insane year yet. But it was different. I mean, while these guys are still using zero science or math in their builds, they have gone from building raw lines that showed true control and mastery on a bike in variable conditions to manicured jumps with as predictable landings as possible. And I don't mean to shit on Rampage at all, as it is the best event in action sports. It's just the progression of this one is changing its course. I really wonder what legendary founding father Josh Bender thought of the event this year. But I wasn't there to chat with Josh, and I didn't see much with him in the coverage, and maybe that's why I need to go back to Red Bull Rampage. So there's someone there talking to all the riders, getting the content out right away. That's important, and it's also important to have a different perspective on things. Because I'm not a hardcore mountain bike guy, I'm going to ask different questions and get something that every man wants to know, not just the core rider. So maybe I'll go back next year. Who knows? But right now, I'm getting ready for the event I picked over Red Bull Rampage, the Grateful Dead, or Dead & Company, or whatever that one has changed to be. And it's going to be a long, strange trip, and I hope I don't injure my body like so many riders did at Rampage this year. But no need to talk about the hippie shit that I'm doing. This week is all about one of the most decorated snowboard competitors of all time. I could list off all the accolades, the X Games medals, podiums, and world championships that Seth Wescott has won, but I don't need to. Letting you know that he's a back-to-back Olympic gold medalist should be enough to let you know that he's one of the most top-tier athletes to ever come on the show. He's also a pretty chill, humble American-Canadian, I think he's recently Canadian or he's working on it, who shares a ton of history and heavy times on the podcast. Before we get into it, I need to suggest that all of you get yourselves a Traeger grill this fall. It's so much better than any grill I've ever had, and the smoke flavor is something that has my kid saying that his favorite food in the world is Traeger tri-tip that my dad cooks, which is pretty amazing. I'm going to make some tonight. If you want that tri-tip recipe, or you just want to share your thoughts or ask a question about the podcast, please reach out to me at mike@thepowellmovement.com and I will get back to you. Also, please tell a friend about the show. I'm no athlete with a built-in audience, so telling people really helps the show grow. And if you want to win a limited edition Powell Movement beanie, listen to the contest details in the outro that I put out, and you can win yourself a beanie there. Finally, I only work with the best brands in the business, and I want to ask you to please support my sponsors. They are Stanley, Dragon Optics, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Please support them as they make the show happen. Now, let's talk to Seth Wescott. Thank you for making time, and sorry about the dog and all the situations you had going on.
Yeah, it was a bit of a brutal week last week.
Oh, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
I will start with an icebreaker again that is not just as brutal, but kind of brutal, I guess, in the world of your life and snowboarding times, because if you look at the world of snowboard events, one of the biggest ones of all time was the Burton US Open. And looking through social media all week, it looks like the US Open is no more. When did you hear about that?
I don't know, 3 or 4 days ago, I guess. The first post that I saw was from Trisha Burns and just showing, a bunch of her photos over the years. And yeah, it seems mind-blowing to me. My first time ever going, my dad took my best childhood friend from snowboarding and I down in 1991, which was a good year. Craig was in the Final Four, and they kind of had like a multi-run format that year. Funny enough, it was one of the years that Jimmy ended up winning. But yeah, it was my first time of like actually seeing pro snowboarding live, and was just totally blown away by it. And then did the jam session for a few hours after the contest was over, which was at that point the first time I'd ever ridden a shaped half pipe, not just like ditches. So it was pretty impactful for me. And then 1994 was my first year competing. I think I missed 1 year in 2001 from a blown knee. I was in half pipe there every year from 94 through '03, I believe.
Was it one of those events that you made sure every year, regardless of what your schedule looked like, you were going to the Open?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Like, and even the year that I was in college out in Colorado, drove back with a buddy through the nights to like arrive the morning before pre-qualifiers started, sleep in a Volkswagen Golf in the parking lot, and then go up for qualifying. It was, for many, many years, the center point of my competitive year, and the focus, and just like the best event, whether it went well for me or not. It was just like the energy around it, and to be a part of it for that many years, it was just huge.
So you lose that event, and when you look to the West Coast, because on the East Coast, that's where that event started, the Burton US Open, and it was huge on the East Coast forever till it went to Vail. On the West Coast, it's all about the Mount Baker Banked Slalom. That's the really core event here that everybody makes sure they're at every year. Does that have just as much importance to you?
Oh, yeah. I mean, over time, Baker came to have more importance to me, as my freestyle years kind of faded away. And, nowadays, like, Baker's really kind of the only event that I do. And it's especially lately, I would say, like the run of minus COVID, the last 7 years that it's gone on, is really kind of the window in which I was still at the tail end of World Cup life for myself, but transitioning out of it, and then actually have had probably the best run of my whole competitive career at Baker from my late 30s into my mid 40s. And it means the world to me more than an event, but as the gathering of our community. And I feel like for me, it took over in a way that what the Open used to signify, and everyone that was around my generation coming together to be there and take part in the Open. As we get older, it just feels like a lot of those relationships and the time that we spend together, and because the free riding's better at Baker than it ever was at Stratton, that it's come to signify for me like where the heart and soul of snowboarding is competitively. And then it's a chance to reunite with everyone every year.
Speaking of competitiveness, competition has been a driving force in your life, like your whole career, it seems like. You have to be a competitive person. And when you go to Baker and any of these fun, like banked slalom events that just have a serious element, I mean, people do want to win. Is that where you channel your old zone? It's like you're missing that little element and you look forward to Baker every year, and that's where you're going to lay it all out?
Yeah, I do. The kind of weeks building up to it, especially these last 4 years of like becoming a dad for the first time and juggling way more in life, that, I kind of really make sure that I'm getting my mileage in January on the hill to be sure that my legs are going to be ready for Baker. And it's like that feeling of still getting in a start gate and having butterflies, and kind of reliving all these accumulation of moments that go back to really to like 1990, and to the first time I ever did a New England Cup event. Competition has been a focal point of my life in snowboarding. And so it's like this moment for 3 days every year where you get to kind of feel like you're still on that same path that you've always been on for so long.
And you get to party with all your friends that you've met over the past 30 years, which is, I think, just a bonus on top of all that, especially when you win back-to-back ones at what, like 40?
At 42 and 43, yeah.
Yeah, which is crazy. I mean, just to be able to do that at your age, which is meaning you're probably putting a lot of time in ahead of time to make sure you are fit and ready to go.
Yeah, I mean, I just feel like, especially since stopping being a part of the U.S. team, like my focus on fitness is different. It's just more that I don't care if I ever see the inside of a gym space again or anything like that. And I think especially with moving to British Columbia, like what my expansion in mountain biking has done, and just like being able to tour more in the year, and just the work that we're doing on our farm, is I'm on my feet probably a lot more than I used to be. So yeah, just trying to stay healthy in life and being strong enough through the sports that I love to do to be ready to ride. But yeah, it is definitely funny to kind of like try to channel all my energy into this one event and still be doing it in my 40s. It's a way different mindset than the days of when there would be 25 events to do in a winter, and you're just kind of like week after week after week. But it's awesome. Even last time, like to sit after the event and have a couple beers with Keith Wallace. And like, to me, it just, in a way, it's like I get to nerd out and kind of relive moments from my childhood of like saying hi to Jeff Fulton every year, the years when Donnelly's around, and just like, I don't know, it's like to have started snowboarding in the mid 80s and be able to still be interacting with people that were my heroes is just like a really special thing for me. I love that about Baker.
Well, taking it all the way back to before snowboarding even started for you, I mean, you're born in North Carolina, you moved to Maine when you're 2, and we were talking about fitness, and when I think about fitness in your life, your parents are both college professors, I believe, but your dad's a college cross-country coach, like D1 and D3 cross-country coach. Does that mean that you were out running all the time with your dad when you're young? Because I would assume that you'd have to do that, and that doesn't sound that fun to me, being a kid.
I definitely remember doing a lot of like children's 1 mile road races and stuff before I could remember. And actually, I think it was just that I spent so much time around his college athletes that there was a sense of motivation by watching them kind of on their journeys of trying to accomplish these goals. And so, not that he pushed me into it that much. When I was young, I would travel with those guys a lot and go to meets, like whether it was cross country or track and field season or indoors or whatever. And so I grew up around college athletics, and I think that just had a big imprinting on me of watching people in their own process to create goals and try to accomplish those goals. And I was never that into running. I played soccer all my way through, which granted is a lot of running in and of itself, but I never run in daily life now. I got heckled into doing a 10K a few years ago by Joan Benoit Samuelson, who's been a family friend since I was little, who was the women's first Olympic marathon champion in Los Angeles during those games.
Oh, just an easy 10K with the champion.
Right. Thankfully, she's old enough now that, and not that I could probably even run with her, but she has this event that she puts on in Maine that has like 5,000 people running together. And so a couple summers ago, I had to kind of basically do it off the couch. I jogged like a couple miles before it and was like, okay, like I'm just going to go do this. But running was definitely never my thing. But being around that environment for so many years when I was growing up, I think probably was a big impact on why I ended up being a competitive snowboarder for so long, because I just was used to seeing a competitive atmosphere.
So you're around competitive athletes all the time, and your dad starts you, I think, cross-country skiing at like 3 years old or something like that. You were an alpine skier by 8, and then you get into snowboarding a couple years later. Is your family big into the snow, or is it something that you get pushed into, or how does snow come together for you?
No, it was actually kind of funny. My dad had a project at the college that he was working at to physically go out and cut and create the cross-country running trails shortly after he transitioned from NC State back to Maine. And so I have these memories of being a really little kid wandering around in the woods while he'd be out there with the crew that was helping him cut these things. And so I think for him, when he added these trails to this university, that I'm a little vague on the timing. I was really young, but I think it might have been the whole post Bill Koch being a famous cross-country skier in the US, and there was like this explosion of Nordic skiing. And so I remember for Christmas one year when we were really little, the whole family got Nordic skis, and then we would go to these trails that he had cut on the college campus. And we also lived right on this lake when I was little in Maine. So like, all winter the lake was frozen. There really weren't any hills until we moved from that original house that we lived in. So Nordic skiing was kind of all that there was, because you just had this massive expanse of frozen area all winter right out the door. But no, neither he or my mom were actually skiers. So that was kind of the funny thing about it. We just happened to, by luck of the next 2 towns that we lived in, they both had ski areas, or one had a ski area and then one had a small community ski hill. But it was facilitated through the schools so that, that was basically the babysitter. And after school, parents were still working. The school bus would take you to these places. And you could get a few hours in the afternoon.
So there's all these kids that learn how to ski and their parents have no idea what they're doing, and it's kind of like your own sanctuary away from parents.
Totally. And not long after that is when my parents got divorced, and that was kind of 2 years after I'd started snowboarding. But at that point, the community hill in the town that we were at, which is where I stayed all through high school, it was the typical ski hill manager that wouldn't allow snowboarding at that point in the 80s. And so I just kind of gave up on ski racing pretty quickly because it wasn't that I minded skiing or minded the ski racing part of it, but I wasn't as competitive at that point in my life. And it was kind of like the feeling of skiing was cool, but I'd been skateboarding before I had started downhill skiing. So as soon as I saw snowboarding, I just wanted to do that. And so the fact that we weren't allowed to use that hill with the T-bars, most of us just did a lot of backhilling, backyarding, building jumps, kind of carrying over our skate culture from summer and fall into the wintertime and just like getting together after school to build a kicker and do that.
By the time high school rolls around, is that when you start doing CVA on the weekends and doing the kind of weekend program that they have? Because they've just allowed snowboarding. They've got Jeremy Jones there, Hossetter's there, and you're able to go up on the weekends and ride with like the Cross M team and the best dudes in the world?
Yeah. Fawcett was the first one to go. And then in his second year, he got Jeremy to come. I feel like it was just Jeremy and Mark for 1 year. And then that third year, which was probably when Mark left, then it was like Jeremy and Adam and Troy Collins came and there started being a bigger group around it. But by that point, they had gotten Eric Webster to come on and coach. And so at that point had hired a kid from our local community who had the local skate shop in town, Tony Laurentano. He was a Burton rider at that moment. And they hired him to start the first ever weekend program. And he knew me through skateboarding and lurking around his skate shop all the time. As a junior high kid, he was just like, yeah, just come up. And basically I kind of got adopted into it where I was part of that first CVA weekend program team and just kind of got swept under the rug, like never had to pay. Whatever had transpired between Eric and Tony, they were just kind of like, yeah, like Tony, if you give him rides up here, he can train with the group. And then that first winter, that was like the first year that I started competing and traveling around a bit, where Webb would just kind of like come pick me up on Friday night with the rest of the actual CVA team and take me like when they were going to Vermont or to New Hampshire or wherever for competitions. And so that went on for like 3 years like that before I could actually get like a scholarship to go to the school and be a part of it full time.
It's one of those things where when you're doing it on the weekend program, there's other kids doing it on the weekend program too, but not everybody's getting picked up and taken to the contest. I would think they actually saw something in you and they were like, hey, this kid, that's why you didn't have to pay or anything. They knew you had a big future. It was just like they had to get you over the hump.
Yeah, totally. You know, I think Eric recognized early on that I wasn't coming from a family that was into winter sports. And in the wintertime, my dad would have his indoor track and field season where he'd be gone every weekend anyways with his team. And I think my mom was just flexible enough to trust in the fact that these guys were like not weirdos or something, and that he was going to allow me to like travel on the weekends to go along with these guys. And whereas like the rest of the weekend program was just at Sugarloaf learning how to snowboard better every weekend, I was actually pulled up to go with the rest of the team.
Yeah, I mean, in the series that you're in, I think your senior year, you made the nationals, and the story I love to hear is people that have nothing and make something out from themselves. And it sounds like you go to nationals with like $25 in your pocket and you're like eating ramen noodles and you're like so weak from not having food that you pass out. What's that whole story?
Yeah, from basically summertime all through those years, I worked at the college dish room. So you'd have 3 shifts a day in the summer. We lived a block off the college, so the college cafeteria was like 3 blocks away. So all summer I'd get up early, skateboard down, work the dish room for the morning shift, have a break, go back for the lunch shift, have a break, go back for the night shift. So I could save up like most of what I needed to get through the winter. You know, my parents didn't financially help me with any of it at that point. They believed that if it was something I wanted to do, that I had to like be able to save enough in the off season and commit to learning how to manage my money to get through the winter. And so, yeah, usually by the time nationals ran around, it was like Nationals were June that year. And between plane ticket and everything else that had been expenses that winter, I was basically out of money. Like, yeah, I don't know, it was maybe 35 or $40 for the week for food. So when we landed in Reno, I went and bought as much ramen as I could with that. And that was what I had. And I just remember like hiking the pipe at June, which was definitely higher elevation than I was used to, and just being out of it, feeling like my legs were noodles the whole week. And I'd had a really good year that year. Like I'd won 2 of the 3 overall events for like the Eastern, they were calling it that year, the Eastern Championship Series. So like Ross won 1 of them. I won 2 of the pipes, but I didn't have the money. Like I was conserving money. So I didn't go to Green Mountain Series finals. So Ross won the overall for the East Coast for that year. But I knew I was right in the hunt because even though we were both younger, we'd been beating all the way up through the senior classes in halfpipe. Like basically either he or I were winning those halfpipes that year. So I felt like I was in a really good position to try to like make that first US team. And then, yeah, basically just bonked. Had no energy to stand on my feet and land anything. So that was a little tough. And that really was kind of like the end for a little bit. Like I decided to go to college, or I didn't really decide to go to college. I wasn't given a choice. I wanted to just try to pursue snowboarding because watching Jeremy graduate the year before and just go straight on tour, I felt like I could have done that.
But you had parents who were professors, right? Like their kids going to college.
Yeah. It was not a discussion. It was just, where are you going? And so my way to kind of circumvent all that, I only applied to one place. I applied to Western State, Colorado, because I figured if I was far enough away from home that I could, in those days of no phones and no internet and stuff, that I could probably get away with doing a lot more snowboarding than school. And that's exactly what happened. Like I ended up using my dorm room in the wintertime as a hotel and traveled all over the West, like went to the Pacific Northwest a bunch, went to Baker for the first time that year. Crested Butte started the US Extremes that year for the first time. So I got to do that for the first couple cycles of that. Yeah, just fell in with a bunch of riders that were in Crested Butte and got some support through the shop there, and was able to start traveling and convinced a couple professors to basically let me just take the finals, and I'd take my textbook with me for the whole time and just read along, but really never went to class for the winter semesters.
Didn't you do that in high school too? Didn't you have some principal that was like, yeah, you don't have to go to school, we'll just let you go?
Well, thankfully, my sister was a really good student. I was not a really good student, but she had kind of paved the way for me. So this principal, Tom Ward, at our high school, when I went in at the start of my sophomore year, I was just like, look, they won't let me ride at the hill here in town. So the only way that I can train for this, because I had already been to the first nationals in Vail, it would have been my 9th. Like our junior high was 7th, 8th, and 9th. So like I went to nationals for the first time in 9th grade. So I went to him and was like, look, like none of your kids playing football or basketball are going to national championships. Like I'm getting to do this. And so he was supportive, and he was like, yeah, if you have perfect attendance in the fall and the spring, you can go up to Sugarloaf and we won't put your attendance on your report cards. So I had to keep everything passing, but that was kind of like the low bar for me, which was good because I was a good enough student that I could like always make sure I passed with not much effort, but I just didn't have the motivation scholastically to like be trying to do well. It just wasn't my focus,
Right.
So I was lucky in that regard too, because I'd skip probably 40 days of school in the winter.
Could you imagine like a teacher or a principal doing that shit today? That would be crazy, because your parents didn't know, right? It was like something under the rug.
Yeah, the first time my parents found out, I was on the Today Show after one of the Olympics, and somehow Matt Lauer had found out that story, and so he was asking me about it, and that was like when my mom found out. So yeah, it was kind of funny. But yeah, actually, it was also funny because when I finally went to CVA, I could only afford to go for the 5-month winter term. So when I came back, a lot of the teachers in the public school weren't stoked that I had left their program for most of the winter and was coming back expecting to graduate 8 weeks later. So I got a hard time on like trying to get some of my finals and stuff like that done. And when my principal actually handed me my diploma when I graduated, he was like, I'm just glad you're here today and you made it, because he knew it had been a little rough in my last 2 months of high school.
Now it's time for a sponsor break, and it's back to snow season, which means if you're a skier, it's time to think about new skis. And last season was the least travel and the most fun I've had on snow in years. And I credit it all to my Elan Ripsticks 106 that I use as my everyday ski here in the Northwest. It was the perfect blend of float and power in a ski, and it was the first time in a long time that I felt the product actually made me a better skier. I could see and feel a difference in my skiing. This season, I'm adding the award-winning Ripstick Black 96 edition to my quiver, and I'm really going to be able to carve up the mountain on the hard days. And I'll tell you all about them once the snow flies. When you are looking for skis this winter, make sure you check out Elan. They've been hand-making skis for over 75 years, and they've been achieving a cult status here in the US over the past few years because of the quality, the technology, and most importantly, they are a fun, lively ski that'll make you better at any level. To find out more about the skis, head on over to elanskis.com. Next, it's time to talk goggles, and I like to have the best in the business on my face, which is why I teamed up with Dragon. Not only are the goggles the best looking on the market, they're also packed with technology. Everything starts with Dragon's patented LumaLens that improves depth perception, reduces eye fatigue, and delivers superior color vividness. There are so many lenses to choose from that are faster to change and more secure than ever thanks to Dragon's proven SwiftLock technology system. I could go on and on about Dragon's best-in-class over-the-glass compatibility or the armored venting for easy snow removal, but the most important thing I need to tell you about Dragon is the discount that you're going to get for listening to the podcast. When you head on over to dragonalliance.com, go shopping, and when you check out, you're going to enter the code POWEL15, that's all one word, and you're going to get 15% off your entire order, and you're going to see better than you ever have on the mountain. My final sponsor is a place you can get most of my sponsors' products, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports. Peter Glenn has been getting people out on the hill for over 60 years, and in this digital world, they are always giving something away. This week, Peter Glenn is teaming up with Burton. If you didn't know, Peter Glenn has the 2022 Burton Step-On binding system in stock, and they're giving away a Photon Step-On boot and binding package to one lucky winner. This system is true magic, a binding without straps that will make it so you never have to sit down and strap in again. It doesn't get much quicker or easier than this new combination from Burton, and entry in the contest is easy too. First, go to Instagram and follow both Peter Glenn Sports and Burton. Second, like Peter Glenn's Burton Step-On giveaway post. Third, tag 2 friends in the comments who you'd like to hit the slopes with. It's that easy. Don't forget, only one entry per person. Giveaway ends Friday, October 29th, 2021. To find out more about Peter Glenn, head on over to peterglenn.com. Those are my sponsors. Now let's get back into the podcast. You do school for 2 years and then you drop out. And what do your parents say when you're like, hey, I want to come home and do a postgraduate year at CVA and really give this snowboard thing a big shot? I'm going to get some coaching. I'm going to go on the pro tour, but I got to drop out of school to do it. Do the parents get pissed?
My mom was supportive. I think my dad thought it was only like a 1 semester thing. The following fall, when I didn't go back to school, he got pissed. And we had a rift for a lot of years around that, which was tough. But it was what it was. You know, like I was committed to doing this, and it really took that was 1996. It took until I won the world championships in 2005 for me to feel like he was accepting of what I was doing. So that lasted a long time, and it was awkward and tough at times.
Did he just think you were a dirtbag snowboarder or something?
Yeah. yeah, totally.
Because when you came back for that post-grad year, your first pro event, I think you won it, right?
No, I got third.
Okay.
And I always forget if Brushy or Richards won, but it was AST at Vail, and it was a huge field, like full international field, like 120 guys, and I got third. And it was validation for me because I was like, yeah, I knew I could do this, you know? And so that year, it started going better like that, you know, where it was kind of like, okay, like I've made the jump to doing this professionally now. And, you know, I think I made every final that I entered that year, and it was just good. And then the following year, there was more successes, and I knew that I was making the right call and that I felt good about what I was doing. But yeah, even with that early success, like my mom was always supportive of what I was doing, but my dad, it took a really long time for him to like justify the fact that I wasn't going to have a college degree, that I was just going to do this.
Well, a lot of those Kenyans that win all the marathons, they don't have college degrees and they kill it at running, right?
Right. Yeah, I think some of that too is like, it's the difference in our generations. And like, ultimately, my dad stayed in education. Like, when he graduated college, he went straight and got his master's degree at Indiana, and then became at that point the youngest NCAA Division One coach when he was 23 years old, head coach.
Well,
And so a part of that is like, that was also with the backdrop of the Vietnam War going on. And so for him, his draft number never came up. But I think also by staying in education, that was a way to kind of have potentially some deferrals, or just to, not go down that road. And so I think for him, education meant everything. It had shaped his own path. So like, the fact that then I was kind of just saying, I don't need to do that, felt pretty flippant to him.
well, the one thing is that you drop out of school and you start focusing on competition. And in 98, it's like you're gunning for an Olympic spot in halfpipe while you're known for boardercross. At this point, you ride everything. And is there a serious chance of you making the Olympic team? Are you in that conversation for that 98 team?
Well, I was early because I podiumed the first of the three qualifiers. The first Grand Prix, Ron Quixote won, Jamil Khan was second, and I was third. So that was pre-Christmas, and then the following two were at Bachelor and Mammoth. So yeah, I mean, I felt legitimately like I had put myself into that conversation, and I subsequently didn't ride well at the other two. I crashed at both of them in the finals. And so, that was what it was, but it was reassuring to me that I had what it took. And, that first podium at that first Grand Prix really put me into the conversation about becoming a part of the U.S. team full time, because the next year was when I got pulled onto the team.
So you don't make the halfpipe team, but that would be a long shot for you to make that first time anyway.
Oh, yeah.
Is it a total disappointment, or is it kind of just like, you're in position, but do you have any idea that halfpipe's not going to be your future, that you're going to be more of a border cross athlete by the time you specialize?
Not at that point, no. And I was still focused on the next 4 years, getting better. Like, that year, I ended up top 10 at the US Open, and that was the year that Terrier hadn't qualified for the finals. I had actually qualified for the finals, and then instead of having a 16-man final, they made it like a 21-man final or something, because Terrier was out of that bubble. But I ended up ninth that year. And I had a run of a few years there where for ISF, I was maintaining a top 16 world ranking in halfpipe, and like being in that kind of bubble of that upper echelon of like, as I started going to Europe, still being in the top seed. So for me, like, that just kind of still felt like I was coming into my own in halfpipe and getting better.
Yeah, I mean, you were sixth in halfpipe at the X Games, I think, in 98. In 99,
Yeah.
You did well as well. But then after 99, it seems like that's when you start to begin to specialize in border cross. Is there like a hard line where you're like, I am better at border cross? Or where do you make that decision that, hey, this is where my future is going to be in the sport?
Well, I think honestly that hard line was at the end of 2003. Like say 99 ISF World Championships, I didn't ride great in pipe, but I did qualify really well in border cross. So that was like kind of a bit of a hint, because I'd raced the X Games a few times, but more just because I was kind of there. And it was like, well, yeah, if they'll let me do both, I'll do both, because it's another chance to get a paycheck. But really, I was focused on halfpipe for Salt Lake. And then what ended up happening the February before, February of 01, I blew out my knee for the first time. So that shut me down. Like the month before that, it was the first time like I'd won qualifying at a World Cup in Europe in halfpipe. And it was like the first chance that I was the last one to ride on a Saturday night under the lights. And I ended up dragging hands on a cab 9 on the last hit and got fourth. Just little things like that. But it was like, I still really felt like I was building towards trying to make the Salt Lake team. And then, yeah, in February, I blew out my knee, and the recovery and going through all that stuff. I made all three finals for the Olympic qualifiers for 02, but just was getting like 8th to 12th, something like that. Just wasn't in the hunt really. So then the following year, 2003, back at World Championships again, Stephen Fisher and I were the only two Americans to make the final for pipe. Again, I think I was like 8th or ninth, and then ended up getting second behind Delarue 2 days later in the border cross final. And during that press conference was when they said border cross would be in for Torino. I mean, really, that was the hard line.
Once you knew there was an Olympic future
Yeah.
for you in a different part of the sport, you were like, all right, I know I can do better, or I can dominate.
Yeah, and just watching Sean start to grow up and being like, okay, like I'm too big and too heavy to flip myself and spin myself that many times. You know, the writing was on the wall with halfpipe, but it was like that kind of validation of being like one of only two Americans to make the halfpipe final at World Champs in '03. Like I was still riding it at a really high level, but I also kind of knew that for me, my progression had plateaued, and I wasn't necessarily willing to take the beating it was going to take at that point to try to progress further. That's the honesty of it. It's like you get to a point and it's like, Jesus, like I'm not really willing to take that beating.
And you're not willing to take that beating, but that's also the year I feel like where you, I won't say transition, but you realize maybe that at the end of each competition season, you need to clear your head with a trip, and whether it's a film trip or whatever, you're going to go do something gnarly and fun and something out of your wheelhouse, almost back to your Crested Butte days of like, let's go ride some gnarly terrain. And is that what you kind of did every year? Was it a reset button? Like at the end of this competition season, I'm going to go to Alaska or I'm going to go somewhere and reset for next year?
Yeah, totally. Because, I mean, '03 was kind of the first time where it was a little bit of a shift. But prior to that, like through the '02 season, when ISF was going, FIS was going, Swatch was going, there was still an AST in the US. Like, I mean, that heyday of like late 90s through '02, you could pick like, I'm going to do 30 events this year, you know, especially between the two disciplines. There was so much money to be made by competing that you could start on Thanksgiving and basically there'd be events right into April every single weekend. So the grind of that though was pretty brutal. And so, yeah, like '03 was the first spring. Xavier Delarue, Mitch Toldler, Flo Orley, Uli Kessenholz, and myself all went up to Alaska to work with this filmer out of Austria, Seppi Dobringer. Seppi was just kind of doing his own independent productions and was buddies with Mitch and Flo from Innsbruck. And then, you know, Uli and Zav and I knew each other well from racing together. And those guys had all either done Uli had done the King of the Hills in Alaska back in the day, and then the rest of them all were competing at Verbier. And so like we all had crossover and friendship, and like we're either like teammates through Dina-Star Rosignol or Atomic with Uli. So like we all knew each other because I was like for 3 years I was hanging out in Switzerland the whole time. And so they were like, well, we're going to Alaska, you should come with us. And I was like, okay, yeah, of course, you know. And that was like for me the jumping off point of going with those guys. And one day into it, it was just like, oh yeah, I have to do this every year. It was like, this is what I've been waiting for in a lot of regards. And it just became every April, like you'd get done with tour. And then, you know, after year one, we started going up for the full month of April. Like we got a deal with Points North. So we just go post up for 28 days and fly every day. The weather was good, and started getting to know the Chugach.
And we had a mutual friend at Points North. He unfortunately is not with us anymore, but Kip Gar, I'm looking at a picture of him on my wall right now. I feel like I should shout out his name because he's just an all-time condition type guy.
Yeah. Dean Conway was our guide for our first 2 years. And then somewhere in year 3, Dean had an accident. He got swept by some slough for a long ride, like a 1,800, 2,000 vertical feet, and got deposited in a crevasse. Broke a few vertebrae, but climbed his way out of the crevasse on his own. Just tough motherfucker.
Right.
And so we had a little bit of time left, and Kip was like one of the young guides working for Quinter, and he jumped in with us. And then that could have been '06. And then Kip and I worked together for those next 5 years, right up until, you know, we had finished filming that spring of '11, and he and I had a really couple special epic days sort of on our own right at the end of it. We were doing a thing for Warren Miller that year. It was me and Kip and Tim Durchie out of Jackson, the skier. and Kip drove me to the Cordova airport. I had a morning flight. He had an afternoon flight. I flew down to Salt Lake because I'd left my truck earlier in the winter there. And I landed in Salt Lake, did a solo drive. I made it back to Maine in like 36 hours, just went straight through and walked into my bar in Maine. And I came in through the kitchen and came in behind the bar, grabbed a beer out of the ice box there and cracked it. And this kid on the other side of the bar was talking about how it was on the TGR site that day that Kip Gar had died. I was, so out of it, from just doing a 36 straight hour drive solo.
Yeah.
And I was just like, what did you say? And they're like, yeah, there's a story on, the TGR site that Kip Gar died. And I was like, he just dropped me off at the airport. Like, he didn't fucking die. Like, what are you talking about? And sure enough, yeah, he and his girlfriend had flown down that same afternoon and been super motivated, went straight out to the Eastern Sierra. Yeah, apparently that afternoon we're in that couloir. Yeah, so that was a rough one. He was a really good friend. We did a lot of days together, and some of the most impactful riding experiences in my life I shared with him and trusted him and got into a lot of really amazing places in the mountains in the Chugach. And that was a heartbreaker. I think just especially because of him being from New Hampshire and me coming from Maine, and like we had this shared experience of like Mount Washington and New Hampshire being kind of like where we had cut our teeth on any big steep terrain when we were little. And we just had a lot of shared experiences and history in that way. And yeah, I miss him greatly. That was a huge loss.
It's time for my final sponsor break, and now is the time to order your Alpine van. If you don't know about Alpine, well, they're the one-stop shop to get your Sprinter van and have it customized into your dream adventure van. And they are the best. Don't believe me? Go to their website, alpinevans.com, scroll down to the Cody Townsend 50 Project van video, and see the build detail and quality for yourself. Cody could have gone with anyone for his van build, but he chose Alpine because those guys are designers and engineers who double as ski patrollers, mountain bikers, and surfers who spend way too much time in the elements with all of their toys in their vans. They can have your van fully customized in your driveway in 90 days. So head on over to Alpine Vans, check out their thoughtful quote builder, and get yourself the best holiday present ever early. My next sponsor is all about beer and drinking beer outside. And there's no better brand to work with in action sports than the 10 Barrel Brewery. And how can a beer be part of action sports, you ask? Well, they do more than most brands do. They sponsor a team of world-class skiers, skaters, and bikers. They produce movies around the team. They sponsor important events, throw their own events, whatever. You get it. And what I'm loving the most about 10 Barrel lately is their new Pilsner. It's so light, crisp, and tasty. Next time you're at the store, pick up a 6-pack of 10 Barrel's Pilsner, and I bet it becomes one of your new favorite beers. To find out more about all things 10 Barrel, head on over to 10barrel.com. My final sponsor this break is Stanley. You know, the brand that invented the keep things hot and cold category back in 1913. Remember what your grandpa used to drink his hot coffee out of? That's a Stanley. And using one is more important than ever. If you're still using single-use plastics, bottled water, you're blowing it. Your plastic is going to end up in our oceans, and that sucks. But you can change that, and Stanley wants to help you do that. And they're going to give you 30% off your plastic-saving water bottle and anything else you order on their website. To get the deal, head on over to stanley1913.com, go shopping, and enter the code DRINKFAST, that's all one word, all lowercase, at checkout, and you'll get 30% off. If your order is over $75, Stanley's going to send you a limited edition Powell Movement beanie to go on top of it. Those are my sponsors this round. Now, let's get back into the podcast. When I look at your X Games, it's like you never won that border crosses, like you won an Ultra Cross gold, which I don't even know what Ultra Cross is. I think, is it lumped in with skiers?
Yeah, it was kind of like a relay race that they did for a number of years.
So is it a bummer to you that you never got the standalone border cross medal at the X Games, or is that just like, whatever, I won 2 Olympic golds, it doesn't matter?
Well, I mean, it doesn't matter, but it is still a bummer. Like, I had such a great run, like my first X Games, like you said, I think I was 6th in the pipe, and then got 3rd behind Palmer at the second X Games ever at Crested Butte, or the first one at Crested Butte, the second X Games ever. And then I think I went on like a 15-year run of I never missed a final. Like I made every final, and I had years where I'd crash. I had years where I had fourths. I had 7 podiums in snowboard cross and 2 in ultra cross for the 9 medals that I have. But yeah, there was just years where it was so frustrating because it was like I won a bunch of time trials and lots of times by a big margin. Like I knew I could be the fastest person there over and over, and just never seemed to get into that place where I had really special experiences at both World Championships and Olympics where I just kind of elevated to a different place mentally, getting in that flow state, all that stuff. And it just kind of never happened for me like that at X Games.
We won't talk about X Games then because it never happened for you there, but we are going to talk about the Olympics. And 2006 is the Torino Olympics. And leading up to that, you win the World Championships. You take second at Valle Nevado. And is that enough for you to get onto the Olympic team? Like, are you able to qualify really early and then just focus on training for the games and not worry about the other events?
Yeah, Valle Nevado basically wrapped it up. And then right before Christmas, we were at Whistler and I got another podium. We had back-to-back World Cups. It was actually on Blackcomb. But I won both those time trials there. And then I had some mistakes in both races, and I ended up getting a third. But at that point, the second and the third wrapped up qualifying for me, like numerically. I did go over, oh God, I forget the name of the place in Austria. Bagestein. I did go over right after Christmas for that one, and because no American man made the podium, that wrapped it up for me. So I went home. The rest of the team went to Italy for the next race, which was where Palmer ended up rupturing his Achilles, and Jason Smith ended up winning a World Cup, which got him in. But yeah, I was able to go home and just kind of refocus. I did a bunch of bowl skating. We had still have it, a really good bowl at CBA, and got back in the weight room for a 2-week cycle and doing a ton of sprint repeats on this treadmill. And just kind of, while everyone else is stressing out and in that final grind, I was able to kind of come back and recenter and rest a bunch and get really strong going into Torino. And I think it made all the difference.
Did you train with the Swiss team as well that year?
I did. Yeah. For like 3 winners. Tanya Frieden, who was on the Swiss team, was my girlfriend for that time. And Harold Benselen, who was the Swiss team coach, was an old ISF racer. And so we'd known each other forever. And then my friendship with Uli as well. Uli was riding on the Swiss team at that point. And really, the first couple of years of that, the U.S. team didn't have much of a program, like for a while, I was the only guy on the U.S. team doing border cross. And then after the World Championships in 2003 and the decision was made that it was in, that following year in 2004, Foley kind of did an open tryout for everyone else who was interested. And that was how like the first border cross team got picked. But I didn't have to do the tryout. I already had my spot. And when they first got that team going, it was a little just underfunded compared to some of the other programs.
Like you paid for your own wax tech, you and Lindsay Jacobellis, right?
Yeah. We brought Curtis on and hired him and actually continued paying for him for years. And training wise, like all the European nations were just spending glacier time, basically week on, week off all through the summer. And the U.S. team would do like a 1 10-day camp or 1 7-day camp at Hood, and that was it. And I just felt like it was stupid for me not to spend my own money and go and be getting more riding in and be riding with the guys that I felt I was going to be racing against when it came down to finals and stuff like that. Like Delarue and I spent days training together on the glacier at Saas-Fee. Uli and I would race together, Marco Hauser from the Swiss team. There was a really good group of guys at that moment on the Swiss team. And then all the other international teams were coming to travel or to train and race on the glaciers with them. So it was great because I just get done in Alaska, go home to Maine for the month of May, and then pretty much go over to Switzerland for the summers and into the fall and live and train with Tanya and the rest of the team. And I really think it was a huge advantage for me over the rest of the U.S. guys because it just gave me that extra snow time.
So you have that advantage, and then I hear there's an event that you went with, probably some celebrity event that Phil Mayer is at, and you have a car ride with Phil, and he has a conversation with you that kind of puts you in like the perfect mental space where like you're getting your on snow training with the Swiss, and then you're getting like the Zen training from one of the Mayer brothers.
Lindsay and I got to both do that. We did it for 2 summers. It was lead up to Torino, and they took the top guy, top girl in each program throughout all the Winter Olympic sports for the U.S. It was a U.S. Olympic Committee thing, and brought us together with a bunch of the successful U.S. Winter Olympians, Bonnie Blair, Dan Jansen, Derek Parr, the speed skater, and others. Yeah, and just kind of had these mental training camps, for lack of a better term. I mean, some of it was just to try to familiarize everyone with what their Olympic experience is going to be like, so that you don't get there and you don't get overwhelmed, and you kind of go in feeling like you've already been through the process. And especially at that point, like the U.S. team in general, like across all the sports, hadn't had a ton of success at Winter Olympics. You know, I feel like with snowboarding, Ross really in 98 and then in 02, and then Danny and JJ and Chris Klug. But a lot of that Winter Olympic success really just started like 2 cycles before my first games. Like, it didn't used to be that the United States was a powerhouse, other than like winning hockey in Lake Placid. It wasn't like they were racking up the kind of medals that we do now, that all these sports that basically came in from action sports give the United States a better platform and allow us to have more talented athletes in there. So yeah, it was kind of a unique time, because all of a sudden there was like this feeling across the board and across all the sports of like getting a lot of us together and kind of having these team building relationships, that you didn't feel like you were going to an Olympics just sort of like out on your own. And yeah, I think it created a really positive platform for a lot of us. And yeah, so at the end of the first one, I had a car ride from Beaver Creek back to DIA, and Phil and I shared that car, and it was just really impactful. You know, we talked for the whole time, and he shared a lot of insights on how he felt. And he felt like he was on his own for so long through the process, because being a winter sports athlete in the United States wasn't like going down some other professional athletic path that gets the same kind of recognition or the TV time and all that stuff. And yeah, he was very insightful and very emotional, and, you know, encouraging of tapping into all those things, because, you know, emotion holds such great power for us in our life experiences, that being able to kind of like let that flow and be in the moment with that is, I think, really important. And for me, like, the best performance days are the days that I can kind of let all that extra energy in, you know. And he was definitely a great mentor in teaching me about that.
And when you're on the US ski team and you're at the Olympics, and there's coaching and there is a team element to it, but when you're at the Olympics and you're running the course and training and you're figuring out the little nooks and crannies that are going to help you boost your speed, is it something that you're sharing with other teammates where they call it a team? Do you actually want to give any beta to anybody else, or do you keep that all to yourself?
Try to keep it to yourself. You know, that was a big transition for me, because when I was the only guy on the US team doing border cross for those years, it was great because you didn't have to share any of that beta with anyone. And then as the team developed, it was tough, because it was like all of a sudden you're doing video review every day. And so everyone can see exactly what you're doing, and your secrets kind of all disappear. And I still feel like that was a bit of a tough challenge. But, you know, then you get to the point where you're just like, okay, this is what it is. And it all comes down to execution. So I need to execute better than anyone else. And eventually, you know, I started to realize that, yeah, I don't necessarily always have the best beta. Like, someone else might notice a line that is better, and I can use their information to help me better my ability to have a good performance. And that became, over time, a space where info was shared a lot more readily. And then a lot of people had the same game plan, and then it came down to how you were going to execute your game plan.
Yeah, I guess if the goal is to be the fastest in the world, you just have to be the fastest in the world that day.
Yeah. It was great. Like, before the national teams all came into it, when we were all out there as kind of independents, especially in the ISF days, where it was sort of like sometimes you'd find some little line that was like definitely like a secret. And that could get you through your first like 2-3 rounds all the way to the finals sometimes, just by executing one little thing well. And then as time went on, you had to execute everything well. But that was definitely a huge shift.
And then in the Olympic final, you're behind, and in the bottom quarter of the course, it's like you hit the speed boost button, you make up enough ground to win by half a board length. And when you're standing there on the podium, you hear that national anthem go down. What goes through your head? I mean, is it one of those really emotional times you think about every person you're past that helped you get there? Or what goes through the Olympian's mind at that point?
I think there is a lot of that. You know, the US Open is one thing with halfpipe crowds and stuff, but like, you know, it wasn't like I was ever a favorite in the US Open halfpipe. So like the feeling of going through those earlier rounds and crossing the finish line first and having this crowd and this energy to feed off of before you went back up for your next heat was just something that was indescribable, because we'd never ridden in front of 10,000 people like that before.
Right.
That was really, really special. And yeah, you know, my dad was crying in the finish line when I finished that last run. And that was really an ultimate acceptance of like, son, you committed to the right path, even if I didn't know what you should have been doing, you know. And that first time in Torino, that was so much validation and such a rewarding feeling for all the years of commitment at that point. And it was overwhelming in a lot of ways. And then I get whisked off to drug testing and media interviews and all this stuff. And then when we finally do the medal ceremony down in the city that evening, NBC had transported everyone, coaches, teammates, family, friends. So when I walked out that night, I was the final medal presentation that night. And we'd been hanging out backstage. Xavier was there because his brother Paul Henry got third. And we just kind of had this amazing afternoon of energy of like being behind the scenes of the Olympics. Because it's kind of weird, like until you have that success, you're kind of out in front of everything. And then all of a sudden you have the success and then you're kind of like backstage for all these next steps. And it was just kind of this really surreal few hours. And even the car ride from Bardenecchia down to the city for the medals event, there were 3 Alfa Romeo sports cars that each one of us was in. And then there was a team of like 25 motorcycle cops. And we were doing 100 miles an hour the entire way from Bardenecchia. And the motorcycle cops are just flying by the cars and shutting the roads down and stuff. So we could just like cruise right into downtown Torino, and just something like that. It's like an experience you've never had in your life before, of like, instead of getting speeding tickets from cops, you're like being assisted to go as fast as you possibly can into the city. It was crazy.
That's incredible.
Yeah. And so then, you know, you walk out on the stage and then all of a sudden, yeah, everyone you haven't seen for a few hours has been transported 2 hours down the road and they're all in the front row. And that was really when that impact of all the people around you who've helped you through this process, of whether it's like teammates that you butted heads with or whatever, it still all helped you progress and get better. So that was a really amazing moment. And then as we exited stage right, there was basically like a temporary set of stairs that they built to take you over this big stone wall in the city. And then we came down the back side of it and we were in this huge, like 100-meter by 70-meter open stone courtyard. And it had all this just kind of, it was like bathed in this blue light. And it was just the 3 of us. It was Radoslav and Paul Henry and myself. And on the other side of the wall, these fireworks started going off because we were the final medal ceremony for the night. And it was just sort of so weird to find yourself in this surreal setting, like in this city in Italy, in a protected, closed space where it was like just the 3 of us after this crazy race that day. And it felt like this celebration was going off just for us. It was really, really surreal way to end the day.
I can't even imagine. It's like giving me goosebumps even thinking about it.
Yeah.
From there, do you go on a full-on rock star world tour of like Letterman and all the different shows?
A little bit. I mean, I had done Letterman before going over, and then I'd been doing kind of like a monthly appearance on Today's Show since winning the World Champs the year before, like as a countdown to Torino. But yeah, I only made it like maybe like 60 hours after that. And we were like day 3 or 4 of the Olympics. And that first night, Octagon, which was my agency, they had a apartment or a suite in downtown Torino. And I went there. Ross Powers was there. Ricky Bauer was there, Trisha Burns. We ended up like drinking and playing poker the whole night and just celebrating. And then I got a car service to take me back up to Bardenecchia for the next morning to go watch Tanya's race. Tanya won the Olympics too, which was a surreal thing for the two of us.
Yeah.
And then I just partied for like 2 days straight, and then just kind of like hadn't slept, like just so much adrenaline in my body. And basically I like kind of had this freak out partway through like the third or fourth night and was like, I got to pull the ripcord. Like I got to get out of here. So I called and got my plane ticket changed. I pack up all my shit. I get to the airport like super early in the morning, still basically hadn't slept in 3 or 4 days, and was just out of it. And somehow my card had gotten hacked. So like when I went to pay my luggage fees at the airport, my card wouldn't work. And I'm like just at my wit's end. Like I need to get into a plane seat and sleep. And the lady at the desk at the United desk there is just like, well, I'm sorry, you can't, like you don't have a way to pay for your luggage. You can't leave. I'm like, fuck. And this guy who was a reporter, I believe he worked for Sports Illustrated, was behind me in the check-in line and recognized me. And he like came over and he was like, could I please pay for his luggage? Basically like that guy got me on the plane, which was a lifesaver because I slept like, I forget what my routing was. I went from like Torino to Frankfurt or something, and then Frankfurt to Dulles to Portland, Maine, and came home and just continued celebrating with all of my home community. Probably after that first week, then there was a bunch of like sitting in a chair in front of a camera way too often for the next month or so. And then I went to go race again. Yeah, I'd been down in New York City, and the following World Cup was in Lake Placid. And I got up to Lake Placid late the morning of the time trial because I'd been doing media stuff in New York. And I looked around the start gate, and Jonathan Johansson from Sweden was in the gate. And I just asked, I was like, hey, can I follow you? Because a lot of times if there was someone you trusted, and Drew Nielsen and Xavier Delarue and I used to do this a lot in the early days, like say you missed training, you could just go to full speed without seeing the course by doing whatever the person ahead of you did.
Okay.
If they speed check, you speed check. If they absorb something, you absorb something. If they pop something, you pop something. You just kind of give them 60 feet or something and play follow the leader. And so I dropped in behind Jonathan, and he got pinned on this huge down roller, like fully compressed about halfway down the course, and just got flung like, 30 feet too high off the takeoff of this next thing and overshot the whole landing and died on impact right there.
Oh, shit.
And I could tell by his takeoff, he was fucked. So I slammed on the brakes and skidded to the top of this takeoff and saw his impact. And then he just never moved. And he had ruptured his aorta. And I sat there and watched patrol for like 15 minutes try to do CPR and then basically give up to load him onto a sled. And then they had paddles on him on the way down on the sled, trying to revive him.
Jesus.
So I just, I turned around, I unbuckled, I walked back up to the top of the course, walked into the start tent and was just like, okay, World Cup's canceled. People are like, what is going on? And I was just like, well, I think I just witnessed Jonathan die on the course. And so I went down to the bottom. I had this friendship with the Swedish team that went back to the halfpipe days of Magnus Sterner and Stefan Karlsson and a lot of the early pipe guys in the lead up to '02. We just did a lot of training with them. And then Jonte Grundelius and Matthias Blomberg and Jonathan all became friends as the snowboard cross crew became more together. So I had just spent a lot of time with them, and I'd done a couple surf trips with Jonte. And so I kind of spent the rest of that day with them. And it was just kind of bizarre, similar thing had happened a number of years later down in Valley Nevada, where our friend Lena Ostwald was killed in a training run. Hers was a head injury, and she was really good friends with Tanya. And so we had stayed around after that and spent time with her family while she was still on life support down in Santiago. And ultimately she passed, and we were just kind of there with her family for a few extra days. And, everyone else was like, well, we're going on to Japan. And I just I pulled the plug on my year at that moment and started the drive home to Maine that night. And oddly enough, a couple miles from home, I hit and killed a deer that night in the middle of the night. It was just such a bizarre, like, going from the highs of a month ago to like witnessing that and losing a friend. And then like, it was just like a weird, and then killing the deer that night of like,
It's a heavy series of events.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So I sort of like shut things down for a number of months that spring, other than going back up to Alaska and having my time up there. But yeah, the whirlwind was crazy. And then that day was like kind of the day that brought the whirlwind to an end.
Seems like a heavy, heavy day. And while I was going to talk about your next Olympics experience, and I'll just kind of brush over it really quickly, you win a gold medal, big deal. No, I'm kidding. But from that Olympics, and after you take the rest of that season off, the next year you come out on fire. You win like 7 of 8 events, and then you end up breaking your arm, and it seems to impact you for a couple of years. But you get back into the right place mentally and physically. There's probably a ton of pressure on you because you're an Olympic gold medalist going into the next Olympics, but you end up winning that Olympics in Vancouver, and all is great. You have another media tour. Everything's dandy for you, whatever. But what I want to talk about, because you had mentioned head injuries, or you lost someone to a head injury.
Yeah.
And head injuries are something that's important in your life. I mean, I think you've had like 12 or 13 undiagnosed concussions. You've probably had like 20 more that you can think of. And when you think about injury and you think about head injury, like knees can be fixed, your arm can be fixed, but your head, people really don't know what's going on up there, it seems like. I mean, I've had Chris Grenier on the podcast before, and he's had so many concussions. And there was one that was on his X Games Real Snow video part where he's obviously doesn't know where he is, but he keeps riding, and he eventually has to go to some doctor that he pays like 10 grand to. And the doctor's able to reset his brain, he feels like. And he's in a great spot right now and everything's working. But with you, I know this is a concern of yours. What's going on with your brain and your thought process?
I think there was a number of things going on. I was very much like part of me continuing to live in Maine for all those years. I loved the travel of it, but in a way, like I was always just an introvert from the time that I was a young kid. And I have had a tight-knit group of friends from grade school, skateboarding and snowboarding all the way through. So part of it for me was kind of like the winters would be so overwhelming. And yeah, there was years where you dealt with injury. There were years where I remember the first gravity games at Mammoth, knocking myself unconscious in the half pipe and waking up to Pat Melendowski standing over me in the bottom of the pipe and kind of like getting up and walking back down to the bottom of the pipe while he carried my board, and then sitting down and then waking up off the hill in the medical facility. So like that was a lost time event. And then, it's like, as I get older, there's other times where you realize like, oh, that's another lost time event. And with all the knowledge that's coming out about head injuries in sports, and say if you look at NHL or NFL, the high rates of suicide. So I feel like I got into this pattern in my life where for years I was self-medicating with alcohol. I didn't drink when I was younger. I never partied in high school, partied some in college for sure, but was always just kind of focused on what I wanted to be doing in snowboarding. Looking back, now that I'm older and can kind of like self-diagnose, I realized that for years, there was kind of like these two different lives going on. There was like the exciting life of being out, traveling around the world, accomplishing these goals that I wanted to accomplish. And then there was time where I would come back to Maine and I would kind of just hibernate because it was like so exhausting for me to be out there, out in the world, in the spotlight, like doing all that. And like I would sleep for 14, 16 hours a day in the summertime at home. I would self-medicate with alcohol, and I would kind of go through these periods of depression. And I had never been prone to that when I was younger, but I do feel that like this accumulation of head injuries, and they started with skateboarding as a kid. I remember knocking myself out doing this down rail out of the back of an older kid's pickup truck and just whacking my head straight to tar because like my rail caught up on a inconsistency in his slider bar. Yeah, So then you start thinking back of like, oh, yeah, there's that time in 7th grade where I guinea pigged that launch ramp we spent the whole day making, and it had too much kick, and I hit my head from 15 feet in the air straight to tar. As you know, like there's no helmets and stuff when we were kids.
Yep.
Like, so then I started to recognize in the process of retiring that there had been this pattern of all these head injuries. And then I would kind of go into this zone of kind of like in the wintertime, I would feed on the adrenaline and kind of that frenetic energy of racing around the planet and catching a new plane flight every Monday and put myself through this for these 6 months out of the year. Then it was like I was having these huge crashes in the off season. And because I was around people who had known me my whole life, I think for them, it just seemed like my normal pattern because that was like what they always witnessed with me. And so like there wasn't any necessarily alarm bells going off for them because like they'd kind of been around me my whole life, and like they just assumed I was exhausted when I came back from a whole winter of travel, and I was. But it was really in getting married and having a child and retiring that my wife was just pointing things out to me of like, hey, like you seem pretty down. And so then it was like that process of having to be honest with oneself and recognize like, oh, what is going on? And really like kind of fighting my way through some really low times and some depressive times. And these last couple of years have been a lot better. You know, like I've been doing some microdosing with mushrooms that has seemingly really altered moods. And, you know, like if you look at the research on what goes on with all of that, that it has the ability to rebuild neural pathways and help with that. But I really, I came to a point where it was like overwhelming of like, if I was really honest with myself, how often I was dealing with depression and battling with depression. And I think that it is linked to so many head injuries, you know, and like the younger kids that are in that team environment now, like they do baseline studies when they start with the team, but none of that stuff existed. And because I never had a baseline, even when those programs started, I was never assessed a baseline. And so like, if I had a head injury, it was just sort of like, you learn to deal with it on your own. And you generally were like back out there within a day or two. And thankfully, those programs aren't allowing athletes to do that anymore, because I don't think that that's something that generations of action sports kids should have to go through. But it's definitely been something that I've realized has weighed really heavily on me, like say for the last 10 or 15 years. And it feels like I'm in a bit of a bright spot now of changing my patterns of not traveling full time and not kind of putting myself through that cyclical yearly intensity to be up here in BC and be riding with friends and enjoying parts of winter and having days that are really intense in the backcountry and going touring and getting to do the riding that I want to do. But it just feels like I've been finding a way healthier balance and to be doing some work. I did some therapy a couple of years ago, kind of right on the way into COVID, and just talking through things and being honest with oneself and learning to accept this stuff. And then just all the other responsibilities that come along with parenthood and not living only for yourself anymore and stepping outside yourself to try to create a healthy environment for one's child. It's been a big learning process, and it feels better right now.
Well, I can imagine it's just a struggle in general with trying to accept that life is no longer all about yourself, because when you're a professional athlete, everything is very selfish. It's all me, me, me. I need to go here. I need to do this. I need to do that. I need to do this. I need to do that. It's not really about anybody else. It's kind of about yourself. So that's like just one other aspect of it is when you get married and you start a family where everything was always me and I, it becomes different words, and you've got to really worry about other people.
Yeah, being a professional athlete is an incredibly selfish endeavor. And even to just look at things that I did wrong, like, and I think that was a part of retiring for me, was like looking at yourself honestly and just being like, I need to be a better individual for the rest of my life, because this has been 20 something years of being insanely selfish to be able to accomplish these goals. And it's tough sometimes to like kind of look at that mirror and assess what you need to do better in life. But it's been a healing process, I think, for myself to go through. And, you know, I think in general, that combined with that unconditional love that you learn in becoming a parent, and just, the whole project that my wife and I are doing of like creating a farm from scratch at this moment, and having that be hopefully something that could sustain my daughter and her future children and stuff in a changing climate and changing world. And yeah, like kind of feeling that humility of such a big life shift, and working to try to make some things better.
All right. Well, there's some deep thoughts by Seth Wescott right there. But at this point, after those deep thoughts, I have something that I want to call inappropriate questions. It's not that I want to call it inappropriate questions. This is what I do call it. And I was able to get someone that you competed against, that you were friends with, that you saw at CVA when you were just a little kid, talking about Mark Fawcett, a Canadian legend, and a legend period, but he's also Canadian. And you're also a Canadian now, being up there in Canada. And before I spoil any of his questions by saying anything about your Canadianness, I'm going to let him ask 3 questions, and we'll jump into his first one right now.
Right on.
Okay, Seth, question number 1. You've moved to the Whistler Pemberton area, and I'm sure you've discussed that already on the podcast. But how do you and your East Coast friends feel about you pulling the ripcord on the state of Maine?
You're a super proud Mainer. You love that place. You try to go back all the time, but when push comes to shove, you moved to Canada.
I did. Yeah. I mean, I was really fortunate to meet my wife and to have that be life altering. And, her son was already in the school system here in Whistler. So it was on me. Yeah. To, like Mark said, to pull the ripcord and uproot and shift out here. It was hard on me. I love it here. And I love my wife. I love my family. That was probably one of the big learning curves of like stopping living a life that was based solely around myself. That was a big Band-Aid to rip off. And I still have business relationships back there, which are now, because of COVID, highly unattended to. But my business partners were really bummed when I left. And I really miss my dear close friends that I've spent the majority of my life with. But the great thing about having such a nice place for them to come visit as travel becomes a normality again is I've got an even better playground to show them around now. It's good. But yeah, it's definitely been really interesting, especially this last 19 months, 20 months since COVID started, to just kind of have it be a cold turkey. Like there isn't an option to go back. So here you are. Yeah, it's been a huge, huge life shift.
So he likes Canada more than Maine. We will go into question number 2.
Question number 2. You coined the term JC Cross and spearheaded the movement to dismantle it. Please discuss.
Yeah. So my first FIS World Cup that I raced in snowboard cross, I showed up and it was like all these dudes on hard boots and race boards. And coming from doing Swatch events and ISF events, I was just like, this is bullshit. This isn't what this is supposed to be. And, I always felt like, because of like Palmer kind of being the one to establish most of it, and even Terrier racing some of those ISF ones back in the day, that this was a freestyle discipline. So kind of to like make fun of that whole scene, I borrowed a speed suit from Chris Klug for this race in Italy and won the time trial by like a second and a half, and basically like protested the race at the same time, and was like, went straight to the media and be like, see this thing that I'm wearing? This needs to be banned today. We need to make rules that like, this can't be what it's about. Yeah. And, clearly JCJ is an amazingly talented snowboarder and was very dominant in both alpine as well as border cross. So a lot of my early years on Fist Tour was like going to the riders meeting, and I tried to see if we could ban hard boots. I like usually get a few beers in me before I'd go to the meeting so that I had the confidence to speak up, because otherwise I was too much of an introvert to say anything. And riled as many feathers as I could and pushed hard to try to move it in the right direction.
Fighting for what's cool?
Fighting for what was cool. And the first FIS World Championships that we all did, the one that Zav won and I was second and Drew Nielsen was third, we were all like standing on the podium shouting ISF won, because we were like, fuck FIS. And I, like, one of the other first races I just took these other like random big stickers so I could like cut letters out of the block colors. This is when Ted Martin was running the World Cup. And I just put FIS is fucked, but I put FUC Ted on the nose of my board and, like made the podium with that. So that was on TV and that might have bought me a fine or two, but it definitely got Ted's attention. And I got some talkings too about that stuff. It's like for me growing up with, say, like the Fall Line films and like hearing the stories of Roach and Rankwit and Palmer getting in trouble in Japan. And it seemed like there was like a built-in animosity towards Ted Martin if you were coming on tour. And oddly enough, many, many years later, we became friends kind of in his retirement. And I have a whole different perspective on him now. But it was like, I think I brought the biases of those guys influencing me through the films when I was young to being like, oh, this guy's still here. Fuck him.
Yep.
So yeah, it was something that I definitely carried over. And I just didn't want to see it be a bunch of hard boots and race boards racing something that I felt should have a freestyle influence.
You're fighting for what was right. We're going to go into question number 3.
The final inappropriate question has 2 parts to it. Part A. An incident in La Molina, Spain, involving Sean Palmer, Hale, Nate Holland, and yourself got an otherwise calm, cool, and collected Coach Archibald to completely lose his shit on you for and ban you from consuming alcohol for the rest of the competitive season. What happened?
I think all 4 of us we got there and the course was kind of lame and, it was warm weather, which like at that point in the year, if you've kind of been in the cold for so long, it was like we'd come through Barcelona and it was warm even up at the ski hill. Like everything was melting. We just weren't into the race. We were like, fuck this. And like we all went drinking that afternoon. And I don't know, like to me, there was some fulfilling childhood dreams of going drinking with Palmer for whatever reason. That was like a theme for a while. But we all got fucked up and we went to a bowling alley and I ended up exiting the bowling alley before whatever really happened. I kind of missed the meat of it that afternoon. But yeah, like Jeff Archibald was a great coach. He brought a lot of amazing perspective from his racing years and is generally like this super mild-mannered kind of Zen guru for us on tour. And was also instrumental in a couple line choices for me that helped win both the Olympics. Like he's an amazing tactician at being able to pick out lines and come up with a tactical plan. And I remember him distinctly losing his shit with a voice raised, being really pissed at us and really disappointed. And yeah, basically being like, if you want to be a part of this team, none of you are allowed to drink alcohol for the rest of the year. Just losing his mind. And I can't remember what happened in the bowling alley. Could have been fire extinguishers, could have been other things. Like there was definitely some wild moments like that happened over the years. But yeah, he lost it on the 4 of us. And we were on probation for quite a while. I think even through like the next good portion of the early part of the next year, like down in South America and stuff. We were in detention for quite a while.
All right, we're going to go to part B of this question.
Okay.
Part B of this question, there was a rat involved, and you supposedly led the charge of retribution. True or false?
I don't know that I led the charge of retribution, but I also don't remember who the rat was. But I feel like this is probably one of those times where like the 4 of us were probably so out of it that like whatever had happened, it was really obvious whatever had happened. So
I mean, you're not remembering much about the story other than your coach was really angry and he let you know it. And you know
Yeah.
what? It's many years later, and that is quite all right. I mean, we can look back at it as that was a celebration of many celebrations and an amazing career that included 2 Olympic gold medals, no X Games gold medals other than the ultracross, but I don't even know if you count that one. But really, this podcast has been a really amazing share kind of on your side of like the whole brain injury and your thought process behind that, and talking about Kip and, you know, just some things that I didn't even think that were going to come up in the podcast. I thought we might talk about Kip. I didn't realize you lost 2 people on the race course. I mean, crazy things and heavy times in your life that we talked about that really, you know, you're able to power through all of that, because that can all affect your psyche of going into races, seeing that happen and not wanting to do it again. But you're able to power through all that and walk away with 2 Olympic golds. I hope you're set for life, and I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mike. It was great to talk with you. Thanks to Mark for coming up with the questions too. You know, Mark was such a huge inspiration and a trailblazer for those of us coming out of the East Coast. You know, it was an honor for me to kind of like follow in his footsteps to the World Cup, and he had a huge influence on my early riding and the importance of being a well-rounded snowboarder. And it's cool to hear his voice. Thank you so much.
So that was time with Seth Wescott, and I need to apologize. I blew it. I should have made this a 2-part episode, as I missed a lot with Seth. I mean, we totally skipped over his whole Olympic experience the second time around. His arm injury, his bar, golf, which I'm not a big fan of, so I'm glad we skipped golf. And the last huge thing that I missed was his ownership in the Winterstick brand, which he's currently an owner of. That would have been pretty cool to talk about. But the things we did talk about was awesome. Seth had a lot to say, and as you know, it wasn't all happy. But he wasn't afraid to share things in detail, and he dropped a lot of knowledge. And career-wise, Seth was the king for a while. And while he wasn't marketed like the king of anything, I feel like with his dominance, he should have had more press within the snowboard industry, but whatever. His podiums, his gold medals, they speak for themselves. And other than the brain issues that are on his mind, Seth seems like he's in a great place. That's the podcast. Now it's time for the review of the week, and it's a 5-star review that comes from Bling What Else. The review is titled 5-star of high fives, and here's the review. Every week, Mike, I listen so I can be able to know what I want to know about people in the industry that I care about. Mike is real and raw and awesome. And that review comes from Roy Tuscany, I believe. When I see 5-star of high fives and Bling What Else, I believe it's Roy. He's one of my favorite people in the world, and if you haven't heard of the High Fives Foundation, check them out online. They have an event going on all the time. So many different things to get people who've been injured and had life-altering injuries. Well, they get them back on the snow, back on the water, back doing the things that they love to do, and it's an amazing organization, and I thank you for the review, Roy. I will be sending you a beanie. I already know your address, so you don't need to send it in, but if you were to send it in, it would go to mike@thepowellmovement.com. If anybody else wants to get a beanie, it's easy, and here's what you need to do. Hit the podcast icon on your phone, search for The Powell Movement, and you have to do this even if you already subscribed, so you need to search for The Powell Movement. Then you click my logo, scroll down to where the stars are, give me a 5-star rating or whatever rating you think I deserve, and then review me. If I read your review in the show, email me with your info and you get a beanie. If you are outside of the US, I won't ship a beanie to you. And it's not because I don't like foreign countries, I love them, but they are expensive to ship to and they require a lot of paperwork. So if I read your review and you aren't in the US, please send me an address of a US friend and I'll ship a beanie to them. Finally, thank you so much for listening, and please support my amazing sponsors who make this thing happen. They are Stanley, Dragon, Alpine Vans, Elon Skis, Peter Glenn Ski and Sports, and the 10 Barrel Brewery. Have a great week, everyone.